Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Masonic podcast, where today we'll be discussing recent Zoom Masonic conferences.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
Good evening. I'm Matt Appel, and David Colbeth and I are very worshipful brothers down here in the state of Washington. And we have with us our usual third host, Steve Chung, who's a worshipful brother up in British Columbia, and our usual guest these days. He's practically a host. He's been on enough shows, I think, that most worshipful brother Barry Burch, who's a past Grand Master of British Columbia and the Yukon. So thank you for joining us here this evening.
Yes, good evening.
And he's taken the tie off. He's in the ring with the rest of us now.
Now we can tell him what we really think.
That's right.
So just so happens that this weekend there were a series. So this weekend we're recording this on October 4th, just for the record. So this weekend just passed, there was a series of Masonic events that seemed to all happen at about the same time. There was up in British Columbia in the Yukon. There was, what was the title of it? Masonic?
Vancouver Lodge of Education and Research sponsors Grand Masonic Day.
Grand Masonic Day, that was it.
Yeah.
And there's another group that organized the Esotericism in Freemasonry conference, this is the fourth year of the conference. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about that first. Like I said, is the fourth year that they've done it. The first 2 years it was here in Seattle, and I got to go in person and see the talks and that sort of stuff. And they're really interesting discussions about various things. Last year it was in Portland, and unfortunately I couldn't go. And this year it was virtually because of the wonders of Zoom and COVID.
So who puts it on?
It's just a handful of guys. I know there's a couple of guys from up in British Columbia and a couple of guys from Portland, and it's just sort of I know a couple of the guys here from Seattle. I'm not sure if I should throw their names around without their permission here, but yeah, it's just a handful of guys, and they was in University Lodge a couple of times, and it was in a lodge, like I said, down in Portland last year, and I think this year was supposed to be north of the border, but like I said, it got.
And so this is the first year they did it on Zoom?
Yes, yeah, this is the first year on Zoom, and the first 2 years when I got to go, it was really interesting. They had like the guy who runs the Southern California Lodge of Research magazine was there. And so he was, he had issues in the magazine that you could paw through, and they had discussions on all sorts of things, incense and Freemasonry and gardens and gardening and the esoteric meanings behind various gardening plans. And it was really interesting stuff. As one would imagine with a conference name like Esotericism and Freemasonry, it was kind of esoteric stuff. It wasn't your, George Washington was a Mason. It was much more, I don't know what the word is, metaphysical kind of stuff.
And so having attended these in the past in person and on this year in Zoom, do you think that it was easier to focus? What were the real differences that you saw attending it in the two different fashions?
That's an interesting question. So unfortunately I missed some of this year's because I was actually doing a presentation for our district here in our local lodge leadership retreat. But the part that I was able to go to was, I did like that I had, for instance, there was a woman who spoke, Dawn Thiessen, I want to say was her name, Thiessen. Then she spoke about astrology. And so it was interesting to be able to when she referenced a website or she referenced a book or something, to be able to go, oh, that's interesting, tap, 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 and poof, there's a, if you want to do your natal astrology chart or whatever it is, you could do it right there and see what she was talking about and call up your own materials to reinforce, which I actually found, at least for that one in particular, to be really helpful, because sometimes when there are people who are experts in their field, they have a tendency to hair off in one direction, and sometimes I have trouble keeping up. So this way, it was nice to be able to pull up the resources and see what it was that she was talking about, and sort of educate myself on some of the basics as she was getting deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I can really see the plus to that, being able to do that, whereas you couldn't do that if you were live in the conference. You'd be left wondering, what did he really mean by that? Or, things that puzzle the brain at the time. Yeah,
exactly. And the drawback with any Zoom thing, right? You can get to sit around at lunchtime and around a table with 7 other guys or 7 other people. It wasn't just restricted to Masons, and have the discussions that happen, or see the guy from the Southern California Lodge of Research and open his magazines and say, yeah, I want to subscribe to that, or whatever. It was I don't know. Freemasonry is a fraternity for a reason. We like to see each other and shake each other's hands and that sort of good stuff. And unfortunately, that just isn't a part of the plan the last few months here. So that was the biggest drawback, I would say.
Right. And so now, Barry, you've also been involved in the Grand Masonic days before, and so same kind of question, like how it was done. Do you see any serious benefits as to how it was done this year versus other years?
Well, I mean, the reality is this is literally the only way that it can be done, and I think my experience with a lot of brothers is you make the best of the circumstances that you're in, and not a huge difference between a PowerPoint presentation when you're present and a PowerPoint presentation when you're online. I mean, the substance is really what pulls you together. I find that in this particular circumstance, brethren ask more questions when they're online than they do when they're in person. So, it's I don't know what the explanation for that would be. Perhaps it's standing up in a group of people and facing somebody, and particularly if the question is a challenging one. But I found that this year there were a lot more questions that came out of the audience than what typically would happen. So,
were they coming in the form of chat or through raising their hands and doing a video question?
Well, it was the request was to use the electronic hands up. Not everybody understood that, so you got guys waving at the screen, and you have guys that in the chat. So, as a matter of fact, one of the brethren that was involved in the Esoteric Conference is the worshipful master of our Vancouver Lodge of Education and Research. So, he's pretty experienced with this. So we were able to identify. He was able to identify those people that had questions. So you can tell some people are more experienced and a little more comfortable with the technology. Some aren't. There were guys that this was the first time they'd ever been on a online meeting, and so there was a little bit of that. You need to unmute yourself, brother. Yeah, the little thing there. Yeah, that's the one. So there was a little bit of that. But I mean, it's what we have to do to engage the brethren. So,
right. So now on to the content of these events. Same question I'll ask for both of you. What was the thing that stood out to you most, the thing that had the most impact for you in the event today?
Well, for me, we actually we had three main speakers, and Brother Ryan Flynn, who is he's an artist out of New Hampshire, a very creative artist, but he was talking about the importance of the arts in Freemasonry and how Freemasonry can help promote the arts. And so he had some really, really interesting examples of how art, in its broadest sense of the word, visual arts, music, performance, drama, can add a substantial value to the Masonic experience. And of course, that's something that I'm quite partial. Is when anybody talks about enhancing the Masonic experience, my posture improves, my eyes open up, and I'm all ears. And he had some examples of lodge rooms that were, functional, not particularly inspiring, and some examples of how a little bit of art made a huge difference in terms of the ambiance in the room. Brother Andrew Hammer, who I think you've had on Working Tools before, I believe, talks about, maybe not, oh well, he's everywhere. Anyway, he talks about the importance of setting an environment in a lodge to get everybody to leave everything that's outside the lodge, just kind of calm down. And he advocates using music and a few other things. But so again, it's just, what can you bring in to enhance that experience and make it more meaningful, to kind of set the stage so that you're in a more contemplative and your mind is open. And so the lessons and the values, the tenets and principles can wash over you, and you'll receive them in a manner that's going to do you the most good. So that to me was really one of the big things from today's experience. And ironically, we had another brother who was talking about symbology and how to interpret this a little more effectively. So when you look at a Masonic building, there's a lot of symbology there, a lot of symbolism, and how you can identify it and what that should twig in your mind about being a brother and what lesson it's conveying to you. So that was really kind of expanded everyone's perspective. So
I think we'd like to have Andrew on, if Andrew happens to be listening, which it's a frightful thought that he might be, but if he happens to be listening, I think we'd like to have him on. He was on District 13 video. He wouldn't allow it to be recorded because he talked about some things that were on the edge, I think. And then he was a guest speaker at the Lodge Leadership Retreat 2 years ago, I think it was. Of course, he has the book Observing the Craft, and I have felt a surge of interest in that idea for sure over the last couple of years. It's a nice thing to feel. It's interesting to see. I wasn't able to find this year's lineup, but I found last year's Grand Masonic Day lineup, and it sounds I'm going to say esoteric, but it's not leadership training, or it's not training necessarily, it's education and that. And so I noticed last year it was in March. Was it normally in the spring like that? Or
but we postponed it because of the current circumstances, and frankly, we're trying to figure out the best time and the best way to put this forward. There was, if you recall, for sort of the March to May area, it was really uncertain about how things were going to go, what we were going to do, were we coming back, that sort of thing. So that's why they put it off. Excuse me, put it off until today. I think. Freemasonry, most jurisdictions, here in North America, kind of after September, things really start to kick into gear again. And so I think that was part of the thinking as well, to try and line it up.
As Barry alluded, one of the producers of the Grand Masonic Day is also, sounds like he's connected with the Esoteric Conference. Matt, do you know, was it a desire to bring something to the States, and it's in its infancy and they're developing, because it sounds somewhat similar, although the esoteric obviously has esoteric in its name, and so it's a little more deep, or maybe on the edge of other things that some people may not consider traditional Masonry, but certainly lend great background and credibility. But for example, we had a worship brother on to talk about Greek mythology on last District 13. And I'm just editing that. We'll have that up on our YouTube channel. Not this one, but District 13's YouTube channel. And that was a fantastic. I mean, I used the word fantastic because it has fantasy. And that was truly fantastic information about the Greek mythology and how it connects in Masonry and whatnot. But anyway, Matt, do you know, or was it their desire to bring it to the States? And it sounds kind of like the one they have in Canada to some extent. There's education, it's an education day.
I don't honestly know the origins of it. I count myself lucky as getting to go, and I enjoyed going, but I can't say that I know my guess is a bunch of guys were sitting around having a beer and said, yeah, we should get together and have a conference about this. But I that is purely a supposition on my part.
I think you've probably hit it on the head. The current worshipful master of my Mother Lodge is quite deeply involved in that. He speaks frequently, used to speak frequently in your country, and does podcasts and all sorts of other things. And so I know that it was about 3 or 4 years ago, a couple of brothers from Esoterica came up for our Grand Masonic Day, and we're talking about the origins of the lodge and how they basically the culture that they wanted to establish, and how they conduct their degrees and their installation, and the manner with which they operate. And a number of brethren found it quite appealing. Everything was first class, and some brethren felt it was a little too far out there for what they were comfortable with. But I mean, that's fine. It goes back to that whole idea of, we're all responsible to make sure that we're getting out of Freemasonry what we want. And it seems to me it's very reasonable for a group of guys to get together and say, look, we're not totally happy with the culture of the lodge that we're in. Why don't we create the kind of lodge that we want? We'll be within the constitutions and regulations of our jurisdiction, but there's a kind of culture that we want. And so these kinds of events, Grand Masonic Days and conferences and so on, I think are really useful because it opens brethren's eyes. They can see what the possibilities are, and get together and put together a lodge in the manner that you want it to operate. And
it looks like it's
meeting your needs. They'll be happier, there'll be more joy in the craft and all that sort of thing. So
it looks like it's just the one day, basically 9 a.m. to 4 or 5. Is that generally the format, or is it more than just that one day?
Well, usually our format's usually about 10 to 4. But again, because this is online, it would be really, really, really challenging to spend 6 hours online. I don't think guys would be able to do that. So I think this year we compressed it a little bit. We usually have a debate. There'll be a controversial topic. 8 guys will be recruited, and typically how we do this, 8 guys are recruited to discuss this topic. It's not determined whether they're going to be for or against, and so they need to really think about both sides of this equation. And then on the day, literally on the day, there's all 8 guys up front, and the moderator says, okay, you guys, you, and you are for, you guys are against. And so off they go. And so that, we try to have a broad range of things, but these debates, I think, are really are the ones that really get guys lit up.
I love that idea.
Really engaging. Yeah.
Nothing like a good debate to engage people.
Well, done Masonically, of course, and so I mean, you can think there are some controversial issues in the craft, and
no,
rather than burying them, I know it's a shock. Maybe it didn't happen in Washington, but I heard there's a jurisdiction somewhere that had one of these.
I love it. I was trying to promote to a couple past grandmasters that I could name, but it won't. An idea of a. I'm going to totally steal the Grand Masonic Day concept and use that wording, because we were trying to think of what to call it. We already have our Lodge Leadership Retreat, generally would be in March. And so I was trying to think of a fall event, probably not September, because lodges are coming back, some like you said, but maybe October, just before the snow falls. So if you wanted to have it on the other side of the mountains, you wouldn't have to worry too much about the passes, but probably sometime in October. And you'd come in on a Friday night and you'd have a social dinner or social event if you wanted to. And then, but then there'd be a late night Friday type of esoteric discussion, kind of sitting around, maybe not with cigars, but, sitting around talking about things. And then just like you have in your program, you start early Saturday morning, you have good breakfast and speakers and events, and you're all in one room. You're not breaking out. It's not a breakout deal. Right. So you're all learning the same thing. And then, yes, there'll be opportunities for social times where you can have a table. Hey, over here, we're going to talk more deeply about that session that happened at 9. And this one over here more deeply about this topic. You could have kind of little breakouts inside the main room and then go through lunch and dinner and then have a nice formal thing at the end. And again, guys could stay up or they could go to bed and either, stay the night or go home Sunday or Saturday. So totally stealing that. Matt, let's do it.
You're on. Although I think October is taken by the Esotericism and Masonry conference, so we'll have to.
Who? I don't know them. They can join us.
Making it a weekend event actually sounds pretty enticing when you think about it that way. It's more opportunities to get together as a group of guys. So I really like that idea.
And it would be not a cheap event either. I mean, we're talking, what I would love to see is on Saturday night, you're in tuxes for the dinner and for the event, a nice, again, if I went back years ago, I'm still a new guy, I think, but years ago, before I was a Mason, I didn't know what to expect. And so I just had these ideas of what Masonry might be. And you think of, in my mind, I had guys in tuxes and, formal dinners and the highfalutin type of thing. And I found out that it's not that way, and that's okay. But some lodges are more like that and some aren't at all. And so everyone has a culture.
But yeah, I mean, that goes back to the culture. And so, one of the challenges, of course, lodge culture is guys that have been there before are have more or less established how things are going to go. I mean, when you travel around the jurisdiction, and it's not a criticism, it's just the way it is. You go to some lodges, and the ambiance, the quality of the table setting, and everything else is pretty pedestrian. And I know this because my the lodge where I meet, that's the way it is. It's not very inviting, shall we say, when you bring guests in and you're going to have you have the Grand Master's visit or a district visit, and you've got lots of people coming in, and so yeah, you get the tablecloths, the good tablecloths out, but you're dealing with the the 87 different versions of cutlery and all that kind of carry on. It's everything else is classy except the tables and chairs and the stemware, and so it just. But for some lodges, that's okay. Some guys think that's okay. Other lodges say, no, we don't want that. We're not going to eat. We're not going to have any meals in the temple because it's not to the standard that we want. We'll go to this restaurant, and that's where we'll do our festive boards. So, again, that's brethren decide what it is that's important to them and what they want.
I've said on this show repeatedly, and I'm sure I'll say it again, because if you ask my children, I'd love to repeat myself. My masonry and your masonry don't have to be the same thing, and that's okay. Just because my lodge does a lot of whatever, pick a thing, esoteric stuff, and your lodge does a lot of charity stuff, and his lodge does a lot of fraternalism stuff, doesn't make any of those wrong. It just means that they're different. And we could have 3 lodges meet in the same building and each have a different approach. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. It doesn't have to be
Absolutely.
That way.
Absolutely.
But Dad, that's the way we've always done it. I always tell people, especially new guys that are coming, if they for whatever reason seek out my advice, I don't know when that ever switched, but if they ask me for my advice, I say, just do it for 3 to 5 years, and then it will be, that's the way we've always done it. It's magic. After a few years of doing it the new way, that's the way we've always done it, except when you have a past master that comes back after 10 years and, well, we've always done it that way. No, we haven't done it that way for 10 years, but this is the last time you were in lodge.
Like way back in, before I was, before masonry, puberty. That's how it was done. Right. No, it's, I think that lodge culture is very important in that sense of keeping things harmonious within a lodge. If you have that healthy culture, it's a great thing. I've seen lodges where they've had a culture in their lodge, and then unfortunately some of them pass on to the Grand Lodge above, and some of those core components are now missing, and that culture seems a little lost. And that can be a sad day for a lodge, right? Because when you see it so vibrant and healthy in one direction, whatever that may be, to see that dissipated is pretty sad. Hopefully, it can be revived by younger members that seen it when they came in, right? And they have the energy to revive it, really.
And it's actually, I got to say that when I did the lodge leadership retreat this weekend, that one of my points of how to run a meeting is you got to have in mind what the purpose of your lodge is. And gosh, we could probably have a half dozen episodes on that, because I maintain a lot of lodges just lurch around and don't really have a purpose, and they should figure that out. Mm-hmm. And on that cheerful note, David and Steve, do you have any last minute thoughts on the conferences, for Masonic conferences in general, or those of this weekend?
No, my only real comment or thought is I'm glad that the Grand Lodges have forged through and figured a way to make them happen for the brethren in some fashion, be it online is the way it is for this year anyways. I'm just really glad that they're, forging, making it happen regardless, finding a way to help.
And we're totally going to steal that Grand Masonic Day for Washington.
Hey, well, like you say, why reinvent the wheel? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if you can borrow it and relabel it, white label it, all the much better, right?
Nothing new under the sun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, there was a 6-step program that's been around and relabeled a few times now.
We've always done it that way.
Imitation's the sincerest form of flattery.
Most worshipful sir, do you have any last thoughts
Well,
on
no,
this?
well, actually, there is a Masonic principle here. By the way, when you steal another jurisdiction's idea, the past Grand Master that happens to be present at the time is paid off with Irish whiskey. So, you can take care of that. Bushmill 16 is fine.
Yeah, and as long as you give credit once where credit's due, then you can go from there.
Yeah,
My rule is 3 times. I always say Matt always says, and then it says this friend of mine always says, and then it's I always say. By the time it's the 3rd time, it's fine.
there you go.
All right.
So I guess I always say thank you for tuning into the Working Tools Masonic podcast. On behalf of David and Steve, Most Worshipful Brother Barry, thank you for being here again today. And that is all for this episode. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Goodbye.
Stay well.